This podcast is sponsored by Consumers Energy and the Power My Drive program. Start your EV journey at consumersenergy.com/EV. Learn EV basics like charging and cost savings. Then find your perfect EV. Partner with us for home charging installation. Get a $500 rebate on a home EV charger, or get $10 a month simply for charging off-peak. Need more guidance? Talk to an EV specialist to help you through the process. Get started at consumersenergy.com/EV. Welcome back. Today, our guest is Ben Nelson. I met Ben when we were going to Fully Charged Live 2020, and I believe the person that introduced us was Craig Schultz. And he said, "Hey, there's this guy over in Wisconsin that, is looking to go to Fully Charged Live 2020, and is looking for a ride." And I was going down in my Tesla, and Tyler Burke was going with me. And so, we didn't know each other at all. It's like, well, do we want to spend this much time together in a car all the way down? But I think we had a good time. Ben, I remember you had a cold. I didn't catch it, but so it was all good. We made some videos along the way and got to know each other, and I've been following your channel ever since. So I'll stop talking and let you introduce yourself and what you do.
Well, my name is Ben Nelson. I live in southeastern Wisconsin. I've always been kind of a hobbyist. I like learning how things work. When I was a kid, I'd take things apart and put them back together. And if there were a few screws missing, I guess that just meant it was more efficient. But all joking aside, I've been involved with electric vehicles for a long time. And a big part of that was just from driving crummy vehicles, and every vehicle I owned got worse fuel economy and leaked more oil. And eventually I said, heck with it. I'll build my own electric one. That was actually after building an electric bicycle and electric motorcycle. And then that gave me kind of the skills and experience and confidence to build an electric car. And then since then, other related projects. I did my own solar on my house. I actually, with another electric motorcycle, I rode all the way around Lake Michigan, which Craig and I actually spent 2 days together as part of that. And just working on a lot of different things, family projects. When my daughter was little, I took a Power Wheels, but said, hey, why don't we put solar panels on it? Or more recently, this past summer, she got a go-kart, so we converted that to electric, raced it around, had a lot of fun. So don't call me a professional. I'm just a guy who I really like this kind of stuff. I get excited about it, and then I like to share it. So I do a lot of that on social media, and particularly on YouTube, where people can learn more about all the things that I do.
Yeah, no, and that's really cool. And I love following that. I mean, ever since I got to know you, I've been watching more intently. So your channel, we'll put it in the show notes, but it's at Benjamin Nelson X.
Or type
Okay.
in Ben Nelson electric car and you'll absolutely find me.
Okay. Yeah, I thought it was neat that you rode your motorcycle around Lake Michigan. That's something that I want to do. Now, obviously, you did it when it was on the bleeding edge, and I have a commercial motorcycle. And when I do that, I'm going to stop by your house and charge off your solar, if I may. So, I mean, that just sounds like an epic trip. That just sounds way cool. And I saw
Well,
your. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say the best part about that was this is like before there was really much for public electric vehicle charging. I mean, like in Chicago there was, but in the UP there's like nothing. So I actually ended up like coasting into a marina one time, going out where the boats get their shore power from and charging my motorcycle out there. So it was an adventure. It was fun. And this is long enough ago now where, with modern vehicles, you just hop in and go. You really don't have to think about it anymore. But at the time, it was quite an adventure.
Yeah. Well, the UP is still an adventure. I mean, I went a
Yes.
couple years ago with a friend of mine, and we scammed some NEMA 1450 plugs in a park somewhere. So you still have to do a little bit of that. But anyway, what I thought was really neat, and what prompted me to ask you to come on the show here, is you recently got a new Chevy Bolt EV. And of course, not being one to leave things alone for very long, before you know it, I see you're posting a video on doing some vehicle to load stuff, and meaning that you're going to get some energy out of it. But let's talk about what is vehicle to load. What do you use it for, and why is this what a lot of people think is like this is the new killer app for EVs?
Yeah, there's a couple different terms: vehicle to load, vehicle to grid. vehicle to whatever basically just means pulling power out of your vehicle. Do something with that energy other than just pushing a car down a road. And the most well, probably the situation most people would think for is for emergencies. So like you have a blackout, you want your refrigerator to keep going so your food doesn't spoil. It's winter right now. You want your furnace to be able to keep going so your house is warm. In the summer, maybe you want to be able to operate some fans. So a blackout situation, certainly one of the most common things you would think of, but also pretty cool for just convenience. I mean, if you want to go out camping or tailgating or something like that, just being able to pull power out of your vehicle and do something else with it, it's kind of a cool trick to be able to do.
What was your driving force for doing this? I mean, do you get power outages? I just want to do this. I want to go tailgating. We've had some jokes here. We've done this kind of thing at EV shows. Of course, some of the newer cars have this built in, like the Kia EV6. They have a little dongle. The Ford F-150 Lightning, and so you have, vehicle to coffee. We did one time. There was a guy that brought a little toaster oven. He called it vehicle to Pop Tarts. So, but what was your driver? Do you get power outages where you are that it's a concern? You don't want your blueberries melting in your freezer?
We actually have a really good local nonprofit power utility, which is great. They were great with me hooking up my solar to them. Although when I originally put my solar in, I just did a grid tie only system. Loved it. Just very straightforward, worked really well, very affordable. The one thing it doesn't do is work when you don't have grid power. And oh gosh, it was literally like within a week of putting in the solar, we had a blackout. And like we'd never had one before, but it's like, oh, you get solar, but you need the grid, boom, blackout. Frankly, we don't get blackouts very often, but I also like to be the type of person who feels prepared. I actually did run my house off of a vehicle during a blackout a number of years back. It's when I had an electric motorcycle. That was 48 volts. And I knew that there's 48-volt uninterruptible power supplies that are used rack mount for like server farms and things like that. And I got one of those for free from a friend of mine who ran a computer recycling business. And because it was 48 volts and the motorcycle was 48 volts, I just basically plugged it right into the motorcycle, had it preset with an Anderson disconnect, just a nice simple way to plug that in quickly. And when we had a blackout, that was 2012. It was a really, really hot summer. And my wife suffers from, she actually gets ill if she gets too warm. So it was a Sunday night and just hotter than you can imagine. The power goes out. My wife starts panicking right away. It's like, oh no. And I said, just hold on a minute. I literally walked out to the garage, plugged in one connector, flipped one circuit breaker off and another circuit breaker on, and I was running power back to the house. And it wasn't a tremendous amount of power, but it ran the refrigerator, it ran the ceiling fan, it ran the kitchen light and radio. So we had cold drinks, we had cooling air, and kind of the most important thing was I had a happy wife.
Yep.
And so I
Happy
figured
wife,
since
happy
we
life.
got absolutely, yeah, it passed the wife test, which is absolutely the most important part of any project. So now, instead of having a motorcycle with a very, very small battery pack, we got this brand new car 3 weeks ago, has a 66 kilowatt hour battery pack. And that's literally just a battery on wheels. It is begging me to do every possible thing I can with that car, because this is the first new car I have ever owned. And the reason why is just because cars are expensive. But instead of just buying a car, I also got a car and, well, potentially a home battery backup and anything else that I can think of doing with that vehicle. So part of it is kind of feeling prepared. Part of it is kind of having fun and experimenting. And part of it's really just trying to get my absolute money's worth out of something that I've got as an investment here.
And the Bolt is right now at a really, really good price point. It doesn't have that built in. So walk us through what you did. And I know you just published a video, and we'll link to that to the, where I don't want you to have to re-describe everything, but just sort of an overview. How does it work? The car, an EV has a main battery, but it still has a 12-volt battery. But then you got to get that power somehow to the point where it's usable again for household type appliances. So just briefly walk us through how that works.
Right. So the car has a very large high voltage battery, but we're not connecting directly to that for a number of reasons, safety being a big one. What we're actually doing is just tapping off of the 12-volt battery system. And this is something that's been done for a very long time with gasoline vehicles, just taking a power inverter, connecting it to that 12-volt system to be able to convert 12 volts DC to 120 volts AC, and then power something, So maybe back in the day, you were a construction worker and you wanted to have a microwave in your work van to be able to heat up lunch when you're at a site where there's no electricity. That's a good example of things that people have done before. Except in this case, instead of having an alternator that charges that 12-volt battery off the engine power, we have a DC to DC converter, or sometimes they go by other names, auxiliary power module, something like that. And that's what connects the high voltage battery to the 12-volt battery, and it charges it, always keeps it topped off. So basically what I was doing was just connecting a power inverter to that 12-volt battery, having the car on, and then the car is going to constantly be charging that 12-volt battery. So essentially, we're really not drawing power from the 12-volt. It's more that it's being passed through the 12-volt battery, going through a power inverter, getting converted to 120 volts. And then from there, we can do pretty much whatever we want with it. But a really good example would be just to plug in an extension cord, run that extension cord to the refrigerator, for example. Very simple way to do a useful power backup, for example, in a blackout.
Now, one of the things that's unique about using an EV, and you pointed this out in your video, is you can do this with the vehicle in the garage with the garage door closed, and you're not concerned about fumes. And before people go and try this, just make sure that it is a battery electric vehicle. Like Larry has a Volt, and actually you have a Volt too, I believe, which is a plug-in hybrid. So make sure that you're just running off that battery power, and that auxiliary engine isn't kicking on. We don't want anybody getting hurt. So, but that's one of the cool things. You keep the garage door closed. You do have to turn the car on because that DC to DC converter has to be active in being able to convert, as opposed to if you don't turn the car on, or you got to be careful. And I think you also pointed out, look at your instruction manual. What are the settings that you need to actually feed the 12-volt battery? Because you don't want to drain the 12-volt battery and have it dead, because if you do that, then the EV won't start, even if the traction battery is fully charged, because it uses that for the computers and all that sort of fun stuff. And talk to us a little bit about the inverter. What kind of power levels are we talking about? How many watts, amps? What's a typical throughput that you don't want to exceed for safety, for reasons, and also so that you don't max out that DC to DC converter or the inverter?
Yeah, probably a good rule of thumb is 1,000 watts. That's just kind of been my experience with different electric vehicles. Certainly, we can do more than that. And what you really want to know is what's specific to your vehicle. So, for example, our Bolt has a 130 amp DC to DC converter in there. So that means at a maximum, it's going to be able to provide 130 amps. It's liquid cooled, which is nice because it's a pretty robust piece of equipment. But in general, you don't want to be running something at 100% continuous all the time. So in our case, that's about 1,600 watts, but you got to keep in mind that the car is using some of it to run the electronics, run the pump that's doing the liquid cooling, things like that. So if we kind of round down and say, well, okay, how about 1,000 watts? That's 80 some amps, and basically we're taking a look like maybe 60% of what that could do. So in general, it's usually a good idea to not be trying to push the equipment, kind of like a range anxiety. If you have a car that goes 250 miles per charge and you have a 249-mile commute, maybe not the best choice. You want to give it some headroom and everything on there. But I actually used a 2,000-watt inverter. Two reasons for that. One is because I already owned it. Converter cost a couple $100. I wasn't going to run out and buy a new one specific for this project. I was just using what I already had. The other reason is one of the other specs to keep in mind is surge. And what that is there's a lot of machines that right when they start up, they actually use quite a lot more power for just a split second than they do when they're running continuously. This is especially true of things with motors, compressors. So things like a furnace, blower, fan, compressor on a fridge, things like that, they can actually take up quite a bit more just for a moment. But that's the surge, and having an inverter that was rated for higher power, it actually has quite a bit higher surge rating too. So my inverter has a 3,000 watt surge rating on it. So even if my furnace and my refrigerator both kicked on randomly at the exact same split second, it's not going to cause any issues because the inverter it's already rated for that.
Right. Yeah, the surge you can sometimes see when you fire up a vacuum cleaner, the lights dim. I mean, that's how it used to be, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah.
Isn't there also a certain like sine wave, square wave that you got to be careful with because that
Yeah,
also will get you into trouble?
yeah,
Like the cheaper inverters?
yeah. It used to be there were a lot of inverters that they were square wave, or they'd call them modified sine wave, that they were uh, perfectly good for some things, but for kind of the more electronic and sensitive type things, did not work as well. Uh, it seems like almost the majority of inverters nowadays are true sine wave inverters. The one I'm using is absolutely a true sine wave inverter. That is one of the features you want to look for if you're buying a new inverter. Um, less less of an issue than it used to be, just because the costs have come down so much that the true sine wave inverters are so much more common than they used to be. But yeah, it's still something to look out for.
Do you have a link where you bought your inverter?
Yeah, right in the YouTube video that I just posted,
Okay.
I have some links in there of some of the specific pieces of equipment I used.
Mhm.
It was an online purchase or not like from Home Depot or
Yeah,
something?
yeah, just mail order. Certainly, there's some big box stores that have some of these things. Auto parts stores, another place. If you're somebody who's really into your car and you want to run maybe a huge stereo at an outdoor party or something, that might be where you'd want an inverter to do that too. So there's some stores that have them, but nowadays, mail order. You can get a lot of variety, really find the features and price you're looking for. AC, alternating current, it pushes, it pulls, it pushes, it pulls, and it's doing that 60 times per second. So if you've got, something around, and you imagine like the old steam train locomotive where it has the push rod goes out and comes around back, you're taking a back and forth and you're turning it into a circular rotation. And like that's how electric motors have always worked. AC electric motors that push, pull, push, pull. So when you look at like an old school table saw or something like that, they always ran at some multiple of 60 because we use 60 hertz electricity. So having a good quality, true sine wave is important for a lot of different types of equipment. But like I was saying a minute ago, sine wave inverters are so much more common and less expensive than they used to be. Although I will say, like in the 70s, good luck getting a really good quality inverter because it just wasn't a mass manufactured sort of a thing at that time. But I've got a 1970s electric tractor. It was a GE Electrac, and they actually made a rotary inverter for that. So it was a 36 volt DC motor and an alternator with the drive shafts connected in one can. And you literally spun the alternator with the DC motor to make AC power. But it gave you a real true sine wave because it was literally just spinning and creating that nice, perfectly circular magnetic fields that give you that sine wave. So it's kind of funny how some things, go around and come around. Where from the 1970s, mechanically cranking something to nowadays, you can just plug something right into your car. I always think the history of all this stuff is kind of cool too.
Yep. And speaking of plugging into the car, I think one of the things that impressed me about your video and your approach to this was how clean you did it. If you're watching this on YouTube, behind me is my Nissan Leaf, and I had done more or less the same thing. I just took that 2-gauge wire and wired it directly to my battery. I didn't have a disconnector. And at this point, what I was doing, I was running that extension cord, put it into my water heater. My water heater is gas, but it still has electronics to run it. So, I mean, that's still something to be careful. You don't want to run something such high wattage that you're going to overload this backup system. But for something like the water heater was really only pulling a couple of watts. And maybe we should talk in a minute about how to actually measure that. But one of the things that you did, yeah, there you go. Okay, well, let's talk about it. Ben is holding a kilowatt meter. So tell us what that is and how to use it.
Well, this is what's commonly called a kilowatt, that's kind of like Kleenex. It's a brand name. This is actually a different brand name, but this style of energy meter is just something that you plug into the wall, and then you plug your appliance into it, and it will show you how much energy it uses, how much current it's drawing, what the voltage is. And then depending on the exact model, some of them can track energy over time, even if you unplug them and plug them back in. Some of them you can also like punch in what you pay for electricity. It'll tell you, okay, this is how much it's going to cost. But a little device like this is handy, because what I found is often people don't have a really good understanding of how much energy things they use every day use. So just for example, I had a YouTube comment, somebody saying, well, 1,000 watts, that's nothing. I can't do anything with that. Well, that's a terrible generalization. Really, what you want to do is measure things, see how much energy something uses. So let's say you only have a budget of 1,000 watts. Well, I used this. I figured out my refrigerator uses no more than 500 watts, and most of the time it's using less than 200. And then because I could track it over time, I could also figure out how much energy per day my refrigerator used, which was about 1.37 kilowatt hours. So then I could also even figure out, okay, well, let's say I have a blackout. How long can I run my refrigerator for? And these are just handy little devices. Sometimes you might even be able to get one at your local library. Otherwise, they're not very expensive. Just to buy one, you'll find all sorts of uses for it. There's also a lot of whole home energy monitoring systems. A lot of times people who have solar will also have a whole home energy monitoring system. And those are really handy for things that just don't have a cord and you can't plug straight in. So maybe you have a well pump or 240 volt devices, central air conditioning. Those are a great way to be able to figure out how much energy those sorts of things use. So handy little gadget, get yourself one.
Yes, awesome. Right. And I have one myself. And after a while, you start to develop a feel of how much certain devices use. And also some of the things that are those vampire draws, the things that they're running all the time. You think they're only using a couple watts, but the kilowatt meter, you can get started and it shows you how many hours, how many kilowatt hours. And then you can kind of add up. It says, wow, this is really adding to my bill. Let me find a better solution to this, or maybe some device like my TV. If you plug in a TV, always is on backup, right? So they keep this thing warmed up. And what I ended up doing is putting a remote switch on my TV to turn it off when I'm not using it. Right now, it takes a little bit longer to warm up, but I don't really care. So anyway, those are super useful. But what I wanted to come back to is I really love your clean installation. So tell us about that Anderson plug.
An Anderson plug is a industry standard kind of a connector. I've got part of one right here. It's just kind of this big clunky gray plastic connector. It handles taking some pretty heavy gauge cabling into it. In industry, you see these on forklifts and all sorts of different equipment like that. They come in a few different sizes, and they're designed to handle different amounts of current. There's some very small ones that'll do 50 amps. This is a 175 amp, and then there's some much larger ones as well. But what's really nice is it's a very quick way to be able to connect and disconnect some heavy duty DC cables. So I was thinking that if I want to be able to use this inverter for emergency power backups, well, what's the worst situation? It's going to be dark out. It's going to be raining, thunderstorm, pitch black, not going to be able to see anything.
Your wife's freaking out.
My wife's freaking out. I got a flashlight, stuck in my mouth, and I'm trying to find wrenches and things to, working under. I don't want to be working under the hood of a car to pull off some nuts and bolts and put things together. What I want to be able to do is clunk, done. So with an Anderson disconnect, that's the joy of it, is just very quick, solid, secure connecting and disconnecting. So by using an Anderson disconnect, literally all I have to do is pop the hood, set the inverter down and clunk, and I'm good to go. So it's for convenience, but also provides a very solid connection. The other thing I will say is if a person just wants to have an inverter in their car, they really don't have to do anything too complicated. I was just looking a little while ago, and I saw an inverter it was a decent brand name, true sine wave inverter, 1,000 watts, $200, and included a couple of feet of 4-gauge cable. So if you just wanted to bolt it in yourself, not have a quick release, not do extra heavy duty cable or anything else, you could do this for $200. Now, if you want to do something a little fancier, certainly we would be good to have some of the proper tools for cutting cables, crimping on heavy duty terminals. And that's what I did in my video, because I've worked on a lot of different
that
projects.
hydraulic crimper is pretty cool. I like
Those
that.
things are fantastic. You can get one of those mail order or get them at Harbor Freight. It's just like a little bottle jack with jaws, and you get such a fantastic mechanical connection using those. So for the Anderson disconnect, it's just kind of this long silver finger kind of a thing. You put that at the end of a cable, you crimp that on with that hydraulic crimper, and it's just a great connection. Pretty cool way to go. That's one of those tools, every time I use it, I go, I am so glad that I got this, because way back when I did my electric Geo Metro, I went over to the hardware store and they had a cable lug crimper. It looked like one of those big like cable cutters thing. And I rented it by the hour. So I actually had all my cables prepped and lugs and everything. Went to the hardware store, got it, came back home, went clunk, 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 took it back. And I think I spent $5 to rent it or something like that. But that's the budget I was on at the time. And actually, even in this project, I did use some orange cables, and I know somebody's going to give me guff over that, because typically in electric cars, the orange cables are the ones that if you're an emergency responder, you don't mess with those, because that's the high voltage system. Well, I had some really nice cable kicking around that's worth a good couple of bucks a foot, and some of them even had some nice terminals already on the end. So I did use those cables for this project because they were perfect for it and they saved me money. And frankly, I have no trouble putting orange cables as just a short little pigtail coming off the 12-volt battery. I would have a problem with putting, plain black cables on the high voltage system. That's where somebody could get hurt. If I'm ever in, some horrible collision or something, and there's, 2 feet of extra orange cable under the hood that a firefighter or somebody's not going to be cutting anyways, I'm not worried about that at all. But I do often, reuse, reduce, recycle, use whatever materials that I already had. Now, if I did have to go out and buy the cable, maybe the tool, that hydraulic crimper, all of that, if I spent all that money plus the inverter, you might be looking at something like a $500 project. But like I just said, a basic inverter, just some simple pre-made cables, maybe $200. And I actually looked for the Kia EV6, that exterior plug adapter that you plug in, load the dongle. That's like around $500. So as an extra thing to buy for, a $50,000 car, or you could spend the same amount to essentially add that feature to a nice inexpensive Chevy Bolt. So I think that was still pretty much on budget, even if a person went out and bought all the tools and everything like that.
When you walk out with that inverter, it's raining, is the car on or ready, or no? You're going to plug in the inverter, turn the car on, put the extension cords. You know what I mean? Is it just curious about, is there anything to be careful about?
He's got a breaker.
Of course, you want it to all be safe. You don't want, for example, because I did use that Anderson disconnect, that means there's a connector under the hood of my car that in theory has that 12-volt positive right there. But I have a rubber cover that goes over the top of it. And then I also have a circuit breaker in line instead of a fuse, because then I can leave the circuit breaker open. So that means there's never any power going to the end of the connector until after I plug everything in, complete the circuit by closing the circuit breaker. So yeah, basically it's pop the hood, plug the cables together, close the circuit breaker, turn the car on, turn the inverter on, plug in an extension cord, and take it off to whatever I need it for.
Okay. Right on.
Yeah, it's cleanly done. That's really what impressed me, Larry. You gotta check this out, and the viewers, you gotta check out what Ben's done. It's worth a watch.
And Carl, I love that you use that word clean there, because usually my projects are mostly duct tape and zip ties. So
Oh, come on, Ben.
glad this one looked pretty good.
I love the stuff you do because it's all functional and it's all safe, and you never gloss over that. So I really appreciate that. I'm wondering how your tractor's coming, but maybe we need to talk about that another time.
Slow, but
Yeah.
it's still going. We can
Yeah.
talk about.
I love to watch the evolution of that. Let me switch tracks a little bit, because you mentioned solar earlier, and you mentioned the fact that when the power goes out, your solar doesn't work, right? And the reason for that is that the solar systems, the inverters are designed so that if the power goes out and you're still connected to the grid, you don't want to shock some poor line person up there that's trying to fix something, and you're sending electricity back into the grid. Now that you have solar on your house, and you've had some reveal videos on, like, here's my bill, here's my electric bill, and there's usually often a negative in front of it, especially in the summer, right? So you're actually generating more than you're using. Maybe now that you have multiple EVs, that's not the case, I don't know, but just hypothetically, if you're actually making more energy than you're using, would you ever consider going completely off grid at this point? Because now you have solar that matches your use, or you could add a couple of panels, and now you've got this giant 66 kilowatt hour battery sitting there. Is that kind of the next evolution, kind of the gateway of maybe I could get rid of this power company altogether?
It's really cool to think about all those different things. The short answer is no, I'm not going off grid. And the big reason why is because my solar also benefits my neighbors. So when I create solar, during the day, usually we're making more than what we use, and basically goes backwards through my meter. And I get credited for that. I also have a great local power company, and I'm credited 1-to-1 for that, which is fantastic.
Wow.
Not everybody gets that true
Yep.
net meter. I'm fortunate enough that I do. Very big fan of that. But it also means that that energy is going out to my neighbors where it's getting used. So summer, a lot of times, it's just the neighbor's central air conditioning or whatever it is that they're doing, that otherwise they would be drawing more power from the power company. Maybe that's being made from coal or some other source. Don't know exactly what they'd be getting. But when they get it from me, it's my solar energy. And if I just wanted to go completely off grid, I certainly could. A big downside of that, though, is once you fill up your battery, you don't make more solar energy because there's nowhere for it to go. So there are certain situations where I think a battery can make sense, depending on what's available to you for grid tie, what the value of electricity you export is versus the cost to import. But if we all had solar and we all had batteries and we all were able to take the excess and go to somebody that would otherwise be getting their energy from a non-renewable source, I think that's absolutely the best thing we can do. That's us all helping each other instead of trying to hoard it to ourselves. But solar is a really, really interesting thing, especially when we start combining it with vehicles, power backups, things like that. And nowadays, we're even thinking, weather keeps getting weirder and weirder. There's more and more issues with the grid. So when I put my solar in like 6 years ago, I just did the grid tie because I'm like, batteries are expensive, hardly ever get a blackout. It's not worth it. I'll just do grid tie. And you know what? The cost of batteries is going to come down later. So if I want to buy a battery later, it'll be less expensive. And I actually do have a solar battery now in my garage. And I got that, believe it or not, from a thrift store. It was the weirdest thing. I actually got a Generac inverter and a battery. It's about a 10 kilowatt hour battery. And I got a deal on it, which was great. but it's a 10 kilowatt hour battery. So how big of a battery are you going to have in your home for solar when what you're driving might be 6 or even 10 times bigger? That's kind of a big deal. And one thing I think that we've got some real potential for is solar combined with a very small battery and an electric car battery. And Ford already has this figured out, because with Ford, the F-150 Lightning is kind of probably the big vehicle that people think of right now in terms of being able to draw power out of it. And they have two different ways of doing that. One is with an onboard inverter in the truck, and then the other is with a system where the EVSE ties the truck in to an inverter system that you would have in your house. I actually took a look through some of the details of that yesterday, and it's pretty interesting because a while back I spoke with somebody who worked at Ford. They were looking at what I did with CHAdeMO and an inverter to actually draw out pack voltage from the DC fast charge port and invert it to household power. And this guy told me, oh man, Ford's doing almost the exact same thing as what you're doing with your experimenting here. And so when I was looking up the specs on Ford's system, it's literally even the same brand inverter. And it's like literally exactly what I was doing, except, they're doing it commercial scale where other people will be able to use this instead of having to try to figure it out yourself and experimenting and things like that. But on that inverter, it actually has inputs on it for solar panels, for the EVSE that connects it to the truck, output to the house and the grid, and then also for a battery. So, there's some people who are like, oh, well, I can't use my car for a household backup because what if I drive out somewhere? Now my refrigerator isn't running, my furnace isn't running. Well, if you've got a F-150 and a relatively small separate battery, you could power your house for days and days and days off of your truck. And when you're not there, still have another battery that keeps everything going. So the integration between some of these different systems is really, really interesting. And we're definitely going to start seeing more of that in the future. It's just a matter of getting the manufacturers all working together.
Right, the right standards. Like CHAdeMO already had it built in. Like CCS, I don't believe that there's a standard yet. I mean, Ford did their thing, and I don't know if you've seen it, but Tom Malachny on State of Charge did a whole review with his F-150 Lightning and the Ford Intelligent Backup System and solar and a generator, all these sorts of things. So that's a really cool video to show how everything works. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that's going to be the next thing coming. A vehicle to grid that now maybe the power company is going to pay you a little bit of your storage capacity of your vehicle, so that during the times when they really need the power, they can draw back from that, and when it's cheaper and available, they can fill up your car, and so you're basically getting paid for access to a very small part of your battery. But all those things kind of work together, and I think there's a cool future there.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is standards, and it's between different industries too. In the past, automobiles and power utilities, they had nothing to do with each other. Household electricians and auto mechanics, nothing to do with each other. No overlap, no standards between them. So to figure out the details between these, making these different industries all working together, that's the part that kind of makes it slow and hard to figure out. And certainly we got to be safe. We got to have standards. We also have to have the economic drivers for it to make sense. So for me to be able to not have all the food in my fridge spoil during a blackout, and to have my wife be happy for, a couple $100 worth of parts in addition to my electric car, that makes a lot of sense. But if the power company is going to be drawing power from my car, well, maybe I can't drive as far tomorrow. So I need that economic incentive. What are they paying me? And right. It's going to take a while to figure all that sort of things out, but we're definitely going to start seeing more and more of this in the future.
But I mean, if you have a car in your garage that's 66 kilowatt hours, and let's say even only you charge it to 80-90%, but you have enough range to go, I don't know, 150 miles, even on that partial charge, you might say, you know what, I'm willing to give you access to 5 kilowatt hours if you pay me enough for it. right? And it's got to be worth your while. And then if
Yeah,
we do that in the aggregate, with you do it, I do it, Larry does, everybody starts doing this, and it all adds up and it makes it worthwhile. And then they can stop building peaker plants or operating peaker plants that the only thing that they do is run during a very small part of the summer when everybody's running their air conditioner. So it's one of those things, just like having a home generator. It's one of those things you buy. It's a couple $1,000s, but you only run it one time a year, maybe. So that the return on investment is pretty poor. So if it's worthwhile to the utility to say, let me tap into all these stationary batteries, or even these batteries on wheels, I can afford to not build these power plants, and I can give that money back to the ratepayers.
Right, absolutely. Another part of it is that with modern electric cars that have so much larger batteries, previously most of my cars had very small batteries. I'd get home, plug it in. You got to make sure you have full charge all the time. And the best thing about this last 3 weeks of having the Chevy Bolt, I can do all my typical driving all the time. Don't even have to plug it in, still got plenty of juice for the tomorrow, or go, oh, I just want to drive to the state capitol and back. I can do that without stopping or having to charge or anything because I have such a large capacity battery. So if you've got a big battery, let's say it's only half full, you still got plenty of range to drive however you need to. But if you have available space, that also means you could do things like solar only charging. So for example, whether it's sunny or cloudy out, kind of doesn't matter because I've still got more than enough juice for the day today. And tomorrow, if it's sunny, I could actually be charging my car off of just solar. And there's starting to be some EVSEs that actually, as a feature, you can set them up to just charge your car with excess solar. I was talking with Nikki from Transport Evolved a few days ago, and the new EVSE that I got, she was saying how I can tie that in with a certain open source home monitoring system and get it set up so it only takes my excess solar and puts it in the car. So let's say you have a not so great deal with your power company, where maybe it actually does make sense that any extra solar you have, that you want to keep it instead of sending it out to the grid. If you've got a nice big car battery and it's half full, you got plenty of room to put all your solar into there and store it yourself.
Yeah, Larry, you were talking about this yesterday. There's a company in the UK does this. Robert Llewellyn from Fully Charged was talking about that. Was it Zappy?
Zappy.
Yeah,
Zappy.
the Zappy. Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. If you know that the energy that's going in your car is, you're literally driving on sunshine.
Why is the Zappy necessary? Why is it so hard to do that?
Well, the neat thing about the Zappy is it's also connected in with some monitoring of your home energy. Here in the United States, the J1772 communication system that we use for charging our cars, you can actually change the rate of charge while a car is charging, but you can also only go down so low. There's a 6 amp minimum on that spec. But if you have a way to monitor the energy in your home, you can figure out, okay, how much power am I making from the solar? How much am I using everywhere else? Subtract, know what a number is, and then output only that certain amount of current through your EVSE. And I remember a few years back when I first heard that you could change that rate while charging. I'm like, oh my God, you could just like put a dial on your EVSE, fast, slow, and the car's not going to error out. But when you can connect it to these automated systems, it starts to get very interesting very fast. So, it's a sunny day, your car is charging fast, but then clouds come in front of the sun, your car just charges slower. It's pretty cool concept to be able to do some of this, but a lot of times it means being able to tie it in with some other information.
Right. It needs some intelligence.
One thing that I don't want to skip over is the one company that does not have vehicle to load, vehicle to grid, anything like that you think should. Which company? Come
Tesla.
on, Carl. Tesla.
Power company.
Yeah, no, Tesla. And
Tesla.
So,
Oh.
and maybe my jaded view of that is they want to sell you power walls.
I think that's part of it. Yeah, absolutely. But the thing that's really, really cool about Tesla is they just have one jack on the car that's used for your regular day-to-day AC charging. And it's also used with the DC fast charging, the superchargers.
Right.
So what this means is that already internal to the car, there's some switches in there that route either power, AC power, to the internal battery charger or external DC power straight to the battery. There's internal relays, contactors, switches that control that. So that means that already that port can, in theory, connect straight to the battery. All the hardware is already there. There's already software that does that. That means that the entire time that Tesla has had that port on that car, they would be able to do vehicle to load with a software over the air update. Like literally anybody could wake up tomorrow and be like, oh, by the way, your Tesla now supports vehicle to load. Now you would need a different EVSE. You would need one that was designed to be able to handle that and connect the power out, like Ford for the F-150 Lightning. They have their 80 amp EVSE, which does have the DC CCS connectors on there as well. So you would need a different EVSE, but literally Tesla for years now could have been doing vehicle to load and do it just as an over the air update. And that just blows my mind because I've been waiting all this time that like, oh yeah, it's going to happen at some point. And I've been disappointed that it hasn't. But at the same time, I just got myself a nice brand new little Chevy and I slapped an inverter on it. So I'm happy, I'm ready to go. But I hope all those Tesla drivers out there, you know, one morning wake up and, you know, they got an update and now they can pull juice out of their car too.
Yeah. And with a $200 part, then you can do a vehicle to load.
Yeah.
I did have another question. What about warranty? Like, let's say you had to bring your Bolt to Chevy. Will you have to go underneath and disconnect all that? Or do you think they're fine that you have this little connector on it?
Well, that's one of the reasons why it's connected only to the 12 volt system. The other thing is that I can never remember the name of it, but there's the such and such act that basically says that if you do some sort of a modification to your vehicle and the dealer has to show that that modification is the thing that caused the problem to be able to not cover something under warranty. I did also want to make sure that even with the little harness that I installed, where it connects to the car is very easily accessible. So if I did want to take it off, I'd be pretty easy to be able to do that. I wouldn't want to take my car in for some warranty work and give the dealership any reason to go, I don't know, this looks a little sketchy here.
Right,
so, you know, with 2 bolts, I could just pull that right back off. And that was one of the reasons, actually, like originally, I thought I'd put the the negative connector kind of way back to the stud where the cable from the negative connects, but it's a little hassle to get back there. And I thought, okay, if I ever want to take this off, okay, I'm going to do it right here. Makes it easy. But no, there's really no reason that it should in any way void any warranty. You know, like earlier I said, this is the first brand new car I've ever owned. I've had it a couple of weeks and no, I always used to think, oh, those people in their warranties, everybody's like, ooh, don't void the warranty. And now I'm like, okay, I want to make sure I'm not going to void the warranty. But no, I have absolutely no concerns about that.
People have asked me that by putting the bolt-on trailer hitch on my Kia Niro EV. It's like, whoa, well, was that car actually designed to tow? Right. And I know there are people that put tow hitches on their Bolt EVs. And so the question is, well, what does that do to your warranty? And I don't have a good answer, but last thoughts before we sign off?
We're in a time period now where electric cars are just starting to get to the point where people, instead of saying, well, what does my gas car do and the electric car can't? People are just starting to say, wow, what's that electric car do that my gas car can't? You know, it's kind of like when cell phones first started coming out. Oh, they were cumbersome. They were big, the short battery runtime. And now half the time we don't even call cell phones. We call them your mobile device because, you know, it does everything but talk on it. And I think that electric cars are going to evolve because of electric cars. And it's going to be because of things like being able to draw power out of them. You know, maybe in the future we don't even call them cars; they're pods or something like that. Your mobile device drives to your driveway, picks you up, takes you to work, whatever it is. But it's definitely changing, and I think the whole power backup, that's definitely one of those features where people are going to start considering electric cars specifically because of the things the electric car does and the gas car does not.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's a good point. And what we learned today is that Ben is on the leading edge, possibly the bleeding edge of this. So what he designs, that's going to be what's becomes the future standard. Yeah. Take a look at Ben's YouTube channel. He's got a lot of fun stuff in there. I think one of my favorite is your cow horn. And I've thought myself about, you know, sometimes you're in traffic and you don't want to like use your regular horn to get somebody's attention. So all kinds of fun projects. So check out Ben's YouTube. There you go. 300mpg.org. Is that right? That's the website.
Yeah, check out my blog. Yeah,
Your
love
blog.
it if people swing by there too.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks for taking the time to be with us today. And yeah, hope we cross paths again soon. Maybe this summer I'll ride out to Wisconsin.
Oh, that'd be a blast. Come on out to the Energy Fair. We love having people out at the MREA Energy Fair.
Okay.
Right towards the end of June, the weekend closest to the summer solstice. Love to have you.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe send me a
Thanks,
link
Ben.
or yeah. All right. We'll talk to you next time.
Pleasure talking with you guys.